Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I believe I am on air. I'm going to be listening to Andy Ngo, or no, I'm going to be listening to DarkHorse podcast. Andy Ngo, DarkHorse podcast. Brett Weinstein. He's the one who does DarkHorse podcast. There we go. We're listening to Brett Weinstein.
Here. Welcome to the first official episode of Brett Weinstein's DarkHorse podcast. I am sitting with Andy Ngo, who is a sub-editor at Quillette magazine, who has been documenting protests in the streets of Portland since 2016. Andy became extraordinarily well-known in the last 2 days as a result of an attack that took place on the streets of Portland as he was reporting on Antifa. Andy, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me on.
So you've had quite an extraordinary run over the last several days. Do you want to tell us roughly what happened?
Yeah, it's probably not every day that a podcast guest comes in with a beat up face like mine. What happened was on the 29th of June, I was documenting a demonstration organized by Antifa in Portland. Portland, for your listeners who may not be aware, is a progressive monoculture, and it has a very large movement of far left radicals who call themselves anti-fascists, and they organize under that name. And they were there to oppose right-wing groups. So I came with my GoPro and steps away from the Multnomah County Justice Center, one of the most important institutions of the rule of law in Portland, because it houses courthouses, the sheriff's office, the central police precinct. When they were marching there chanting, "No hate, no fear," the next thing that happened to me was I got hit on the back of the head really hard. And I'm an extremely passive person. I've never been in fights. So I don't even, until now, didn't know what a punch felt like. So it took a few seconds for me to register what had happened. I was knocked forward. By the time I realized it and kind of regained my balance, the punches and hits just kept coming from every direction. And when I thought it was over, it wasn't.
So let's back up a little bit. You and I are friends, and I'm also a Twitter follower of yours. And you were quite concerned about what would happen to you at this protest. And you and I talked about whether I might join you. Ultimately, I did not join you. I'm pretty recognizable, and the Antifa is not a fan of me. And I suspect had I been there, it would have just created a second victim. But nonetheless, you knew that these folks had the potential for violence, and you went anyway. Why did you go?
You're right that I've been targeted quite relentlessly by Antifa, particularly since the 1st of May Day. That was when I was maced and punched in the stomach, and then doxxed. They released my family's address online. And then a few days after that, attacked when I was at the gym. All of these incidents were reported to police, and not much action had been done. Names of suspects provided, but no arrests made more than about 2 months ago. So I knew that I was going into a hostile environment. And I knew that the attacks on me before were meant to intimidate me into not documenting them anymore.
I think that's a key point, is that the purpose of the attacks is to ensure that nobody documents what is taking place. In other words, you have people in the Antifa who dress in black. I think they would probably say that they do it for self-protection, but it's clearly a mechanism to anonymize themselves so that they can commit crimes and get away with it. So you have a group of people who are massing, dressed for criminal activity, and they don't want it documented. And so I guess what I'd like to find out from you is what was your mindset at the point that you decided to, I mean, it's quite clear in the video that you walked, not only did you go to the protest, but you walked right into the Antifa ranks.
Looking back now, I feel naive, but I was thinking that if these people really knew who I was, they wouldn't believe all the things that some of their most devout ideologues were saying about me. For example, calling me a white supremacist, far-right, a propagandist for Nazis. Actually, that morning, before I went to the event, I put on a helmet because of the escalating tensions that have been happening. And I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror before I left. And I decided to take the helmet off and leave it at home. I told myself, I don't want to give anybody even the possible perception that I came ready to fight or that I'm a hostile person. That was a mistake. They went for my head and face and eyes in the attack.
With weaponized gloves.
Yes. From what I could see before I was blinded by what they say were milkshakes and eggs, the people punching me were wearing gloves that have fiberglass material on the knuckles, so they're much harder. I believe that's probably what caused the cuts and abrasions. When the punches started happening all around me, I kept thinking, I could see the Monoma County Justice Center. I was thinking, okay, at any moment, the police are going to come in and swoop me out. But it didn't happen. What ended up happening next was they beat me so badly that I lost control of my GoPro, which is brand new. And that was the one thing I was looking forward to a lot, was using it for the first time. A masked person grabbed it away from me and ran off. And then I thought, okay, they have that. Do they have what they want? Are they going to leave me alone now? I put up my arms to block my face from any more hits and to also signal to them that this is a surrender. They took that as a sign to go in harder. So then came more punches, more kicks, and a hail of liquids that blinded me, really stung my skin, and they sprayed stuff all over me. And so when I was walking away, that you may have seen in the viral video now, I was just hoping that I was walking in a direction away from them, because I actually didn't know where I was going. And I just kept walking, and I said, at any minute now, the police are going to run in and help me. And it never happened. I made it all the way across the park to the front of the courthouse, and I lost my balance, and I sat on the ground. And a SWAT team of medics approached me. I let them know that I needed help. They said, in order to get to the ambulance and be taken to the hospital, I needed to walk back to the police precinct. So I had to go back in the direction of where I was just attacked by this crowd.
So the police were there. They were nearby.
There you go.
They were nearby.
And they did not act.
They did not.
So there are a couple things that I think need to be interjected here. You say they punched you. I think it has to be made clear to the audience. They sucker punched you. There was no question that you were not going to hit back. It would have been insane to do so, and it isn't your nature, and they well know that. They sucker punched you, wearing disguises to get away with it. They used weaponized gloves, so even a punch doesn't capture what happened to you. The injuries on your face too. But this was an attack by cowards of somebody who they knew would not fight back. And I must say, I find that absolutely despicable. And I think that something also needs to be said with respect to your presence there, which is, I feel, when I heard that you had been injured and I knew that you had worried that it might happen, I couldn't help but draw a connection with Christopher Hitchens having elected to be waterboarded in order to discover if it was torture. It's not a perfect analogy, but in a sense, who wants to be waterboarded, right? But somebody has to in order to be able to speak with authority about what it is. Who wants to be attacked by the Antifa? Nobody. But to the extent that they want to pretend that what they are doing is fighting fascists, somebody has to document their fight, and the fact that that puts you in danger is the point. How is it possible that somebody like you, going into a protest with a camera, is attacked with police nearby and they don't intervene? That tells you something is very wrong with the system, and it is wrong in particular here in Portland. And I think the reason has a lot to do with the mayor who also in this case happens to be the police commissioner. And I can't help but point out the connection between what happened here to you and what happened at Evergreen to me. The president of Evergreen College happens to be in a position to tell the police not to intervene in criminal activity because the campus police are the ones with jurisdiction and he happens to be their boss. It happens to be the case in Portland that the mayor is also the police commissioner.
We need to change those laws.
Absolutely clear from what happened over the weekend. It's that you can't have a mayor who has to face re-election in charge of deciding whether or not the police enforce the law, because what will happen is that a mayor pandering to a particular constituency will end up putting people in danger. I know that I have a family here and I feel in danger living in Portland, knowing that the mayor will not enforce the law if certain people are committing crimes, but not others. And I think somehow this just has to end. The police have to enforce the law. Antifa are very clear that they have no respect for it. They chant "all cops are bastards" right out in the open, and then they commit crimes. It needs to be addressed.
The police and authorities had ample opportunity to prepare properly for Saturday because Antifa had broadcasted the intent to quote unquote physically confront. And with the group's long history of militant violence, I don't understand why the police keep responding the same way, which is basically just to let citizens be assaulted with impunity. I mean, being in front of you today, I'm speaking a little bit slower. From those injuries that day to my head, the CT scan at the hospital confirmed that I have a brain hemorrhage. And I've never had a brain injury, and it's only now, the more that I'm speaking, that I'm realizing, oh, there's certain minor deficiencies that I didn't realize while just laying in the hospital bed, right?
So you're actually feeling some sort of neurological deficit from brain injury.
I do, and it makes it sound like so serious. And at the time, I know that I was bleeding and dazed and all that, but like I said, I'd never been in a fight, so I thought maybe it wasn't as bad as what happened. And I watched this video, and there's at least a dozen people just kicking, hitting, throwing stuff at me, and then I see, oh, it was that bad.
No, it was absolutely that bad. I mean, you were not only admitted to the hospital,
This is
but
a great little take.
I visited you in the hospital. I heard them give the orders that you had to be awakened every hour to make sure you didn't fall into a coma. This was serious stuff. You received a serious head injury at the hands of people who are role playing some kind of bizarre delusion that fascists are everywhere, that you are one.
Lots of people would do that if the police don't enforce themselves. The streets will be full of those people overnight.
I was expecting the press to be descending on you in some form, and when I got there, I was surprised that you were in the hallway, right? You hadn't gotten a room yet. I mean, it was true that they required you to leave your name to go visit you, but am I right that the press has largely so far not covered the story?
It's unfortunate that some stories have been focused on how the right pounced on this and took advantage of this story for their own cause, rather than focusing on not just what happened to me, but the larger context of political violence that has been escalating in the city ever since the 2016 election results were announced.
So there's a lot to be learned from this. I think the parallels between what happened to you and what happened to me at Evergreen are too many to ignore. And there's a way in which I know that the right did, I wouldn't say pounce on the story, but there's a way in which the story matches an accusation that the right has been leveling. But that was exactly the same thing that happened when it was me in their sights, and I'm not on the right. So I see this as very much a non-partisan issue. You have people who say that they are on the left, behaving very illiberally, behaving violently, and responding to an unnuanced and delusional view of what's taking place in society. And the things that are supposed to kick in and prevent it from happening are not functioning for political reasons. So you have a sense of what should happen next so that this doesn't happen to somebody else?
The local authorities need to heed the warnings of the federal authorities when it comes to Antifa. Since 2016, the DHS has described Antifa activities as domestic terrorist violence. Not the group itself and the movement itself, but the activities. And that is something that the local police here, either for political reasons or what, I don't know, don't take serious. In fact, unfortunately, very recently, the Portland City Council actually voted to withdraw the city from the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force, citing concerns that the FBI and federal authorities unfairly monitor Muslims and left-wing groups. So we have a city council and a constituency in the city who are not violent militants, but share a certain ideological alignment with Antifa and therefore believe their cause is just and moral. And this is what gives them the legitimacy to continue to do what they do. We have a there's a much larger concentric circle
I see him out there.
Antifa sympathetic writers in the media who whitewash mainstream
bastard.
Antifa tactics into
God damn it.
making it so that the public don't even see what they do as problematic. But I hope with what happened to me, and I'm very fortunate that an Oregonian journalist at least caught part of the attack on camera, but it brings to makes it very clear that this movement does not deserve to be called anti-fascist. That's an absolute misnomer that they give themselves. And the media has been compliant in calling them that.
Go for it,
I've been looking into this movement for a while. And
you go do your thing.
I would describe them as a paramilitary-like movement of extreme anarchism and communism, and their modus operandi is violence and intimidation against their opponents.
Have I played that? Never played that thing.
If not violence, then disinformation and misinformation campaigns to smear the reputations of their opponents. For example, somebody like me who's written for mainstream publications
100%
and works for a centrist magazine, smearing me as a Nazi,
see if I can keep it 100%
and therefore
for one more battle.
Fit to be targeted, to be doxxed, to be hit, and in this case, maybe even almost nearly killed. So,
yeah, beneath human dignity is the objective. They paint you as beneath human dignity, and then they act accordingly.
Yeah, that was made so clear to me when all this happened and nobody came to help me as I was stumbling away, bleeding, blinded. I could hear the people laughing at me behind me.
It's caught on the video, yeah.
And what's so ironic is that moments before they were chanting, "No hate, no fear."
Well, there is some sort of let's put it this way, the illiberal authoritarian left keeps resetting the bar of irony. Everything about it is ironic, including the name anti-fascist, which I agree is not what they are at all. And, again, this goes back to this being a non-partisan issue. We have a criminal enterprise operating in the open with the tacit approval of the political apparatus, which holds the police back from simply enforcing the law. And
it's the brown shirts.
The result is totally predictable. I would also describe them as a paramilitary organization. In fact, in thinking about this interview, that was exactly the term that came to mind. And what also comes to mind is the fact that people across the political spectrum have seen the same thing. If you don't encounter Antifa directly, you don't know what they're about. But once you've encountered them, it becomes very clear. So, for example, Chris Hedges, who is, like me, quite far to the left, has also had serious problems with Black Bloc anarchists because they are hell-bent on violence. In fact, it becomes a kind of excuse for violence, is the false portrayal of this enemy that can only be confronted with these tactics. And in fact, there's a whole language that surrounds it. They talk about diversity of tactics. Diversity of tactics is a code for we are going to support those who wish to be violent and behave in a way that allows them to disappear into the crowd and not to pay any price for doing so. And who's on the other end of it? It's you. It could easily be me. It's Chris Hedges. It makes no sense for this to be tolerated, and it has an absolutely chilling effect.
Partly your fault,
discourse. Brett. The simple ability to say what is.
You and the knuckleheads of the university.
People dressed to commit crimes who walk the streets openly, commit violent acts, and are able to get away with it.
And where were you before they chased you out of the universities?
It starts in the name for
comfy with your money.
And
you were comfy up there. You didn't give a damn.
For example, like you said, the diversity of tactics, what that is really code for, right?
I got a bunch of cowards on my team.
Others and maybe even engaging.
We're going to lose this. I'm going to get killed.
Physical confrontations.
Fucking cowards.
Another one they use is self-defense, community self-defense. And they don't mean it how
all right,
people
I'm going to camp right here by this rock. It's a safe place.
Action that is premeditated.
No team members.
So I want to chase down an issue that I think is at the heart of how this whole system functions surrounding an incident like the one that happened to you.
P26.
There's a way in which people's teams are encoded very deeply in their psyches at the moment. And
right now.
These things are reinforced on social media by the algorithms that cause you to encounter things that flatter your preconceptions and demonize those that you perceive as different from you. And it results in people looking at an event like what happened with you, and instead of looking at it for what it is, a transparent attack, a violent attack on somebody who is simply reporting, simply pointing a camera at something in an American street in broad daylight, that what happens is people intuit what sources they are to pay attention to in order to have sense made of this event. So the fact that you were on Fox News with Tucker Carlson tonight, the Wall Street Journal released a very sober editorial about what happened to you. It's not surprising that those two sources were the first people to pick up on the story at Evergreen. It's the usual suspects. And the reason it works this way is because those on the left know that they are supposed to discount anything that comes across those airwaves. And so there's a way in which you've got people on Twitter, for example, blue checkmark folks from the left, saying the most vile stuff about how you deserve this attack. And it's like, what would you have had to do to deserve an attack? There's nothing short of you actually having engaged in violence against your attackers that would justify it. And yet you have people who are presumably educated and hold down a job speaking as if pointing a camera at a protest could possibly justify a physical beating. It makes no sense. But it has something to do with us having been divided. The press who hasn't shown are the press that people who see themselves as on the left pay attention to. And the press that has shown up is the press that is watched by people on the right. And so the point is, how is it that Antifa and people at large, importantly, have such a wrong understanding of who you are?
Okay, this thing's made of glass, but it's got pretty good
damage. There's one narrative on the right, and there's one narrative on the left.
Everybody was buying them one day.
Your friend, somebody who's interacted with you personally, that the
Sometimes
narrative about you on the
sale,
left, there's
have to buy
very little resemblance to reality. It has a few superficial analogies to your actual person, but in terms of, you're of Vietnamese descent, you're gay, that gets reported, those are facts. But what is said about you is that you're a provocateur, right? And I think the point is, the question is, which story would you like to believe? Would you like to believe that Andy Ngo points a camera at things and you can interpret as well as anybody what the footage means? Or would you like to believe that, Andy Ngo is trying to paint a picture to demonize kids who are upset about real stuff? And the point is, those two stories can't be reconciled. And one of them is just simply a fiction. But for people who start by pursuing the story in one of those sources, they will come to the conclusion that somehow you invited this.
It's unfortunate that some of the mainstream press reporting on this, as well as the local paper,
we're going to A1,
really chosen to focus on labels too fixed to the right-wing.
We'll see if our team goes with us.
Commentator.
Usually they stop to snipe or something, and
to me, my views in my professional work as a journalist is irrelevant to the attack that happened to me. By sort of contextualizing
play cautious. You're in a digital tank.
Hates of mine. I almost feel like they're kind of, in a subtle way, finding a justification for what happened to me. It was the same thing similarly to after the Charlie Hebdo attacks in 2015 by the jihadists. Then those on the progressive left started raising up points like, well, the publication was provocative and the work that they published was insulting to Muslims and their prophet. And I don't see what purpose those points serve other than, in a way, to say indirectly that you kind of had it coming.
Yeah, this idea that you had it coming is
got a lot of guys camping.
Other than it's violent.
Quite a few guys trying to go up to
what troubles me most about it is that we're Americans, and somehow that is not carrying any weight with people. People view you and me as other. And I would contrast that. You and I travel in parallel circles. There's a group of people who isn't behaving this way. People who, when we have gathered outside of the context of events, and we've been, at a meal together, everybody knows that you and I are on different sides of the political spectrum. It's not a fundamental fact. It might be the basis for conversation. Why is it that you and I see an issue differently? But there's no sense that the other person is less deserving of the right to walk down the street safely. And that's a preposterous notion. And so I guess the question really is, what fraction of the public is actually still in touch with that idea that your politics actually have nothing to say about whether or not what happened to you in the streets of Portland is a tragic and frightening turn of events? Of course it is. A human being who was reporting, which is as close to a sacred American right as there is, was physically attacked for having done so. That is an offense to every person who actually cares about the ideals that the nation was founded on. There's no left or right about that. It's just simply despicable. Just before this interview, I encountered a couple of instances where somebody had actually forged headlines, made it appear that publications had reported that you had faked your own attack. Now, I must say that when I looked at these things, my first thought was not that they were a forgery. My first thought was, oh my goodness, how could these publications possibly portray this? I mean,
what a weenie.
I know, because I went to the hospital. I saw you injured in the immediate aftermath of this attack. You didn't fake an attack that caused a brain bleed? That's an insane notion. Well, turns out these publications didn't say that you did, but people who apparently were given no pause whatsoever by the damage done to you made it even worse by viciously portraying you as the cause of the attack against you. I'm not even sure what to say. What is that like to have people add insult to injury by just simply manufacturing a reason to blame you entirely for something for which you have no blame?
Antifa has no problem engaging in hoaxes and disseminating hoaxes. They're particularly angry at me that back in earlier this year, I read a story for the New York Post where I investigated 15 plus allegations that were being pushed out by Antifa and their allies. And by allies, I mean the Democratic Socialists of America and various other far left movements and groups in town, with claims that LGBT people were being targeted for beatings, robberies, murders, kidnappings on the streets of Portland. Living here, you could not find a more LGBT accepting place. And hearing that these things were happening, and yet no evidence was put forth. And so in the one incident that was reported to police, the narrative that was put out on the GoFundMe about being beat on the head by transphobes with bats, that story was entirely different from that documented in the police report. So they're very angry that I wrote that piece, and now perhaps they think it's a joke, or maybe it's just them trying to engage in another hoax. They're putting out these fake news story screenshots that I was involved in paying people I knew to beat me up so that I could do a fundraiser and get money off that. Well, first of all, that would be a criminal act of fraud. So if anybody has any evidence of wrongdoing on my part, make it public, please. I see accusations that I was provoking people, and I would like specifics. There are cameras everywhere by activists. You have evidence that I was not conducting myself in a professional way. Please put that out for the record. I maintain that I was entirely professional throughout the whole day leading up to and after the attack.
I can also say that I've been at a protest with you before. I've seen the video of how you behaved here. There is a question about the wisdom of walking into such a scenario, but it's the same question that one would have to ask a war correspondent. Is it smart to go to a war zone? Well, no, it's not. On the other hand, somebody has to do it. And I think the real point about the wounds on your face and the injury to your head, that's a warning to the rest of us. That's a warning. Don't do what Andy does. And what Andy does is he points a camera at things that other people don't. He reveals something true. And those who are participating in that true thing do not wish it to be understood. They wish to portray themselves as the champion of victims, when in fact they are eager to engage in violence.
Everybody knows it.
And willing to sucker punch. And as far as I'm concerned, you don't need to defend yourself from accusations that you had a hand in this. I appreciate your willingness to invite people to present that evidence. That would be my instinct too if I were in your shoes.
But be quick to get over there if nobody's going over there.
Went to a place where people involved in madness did what they do to witches. And the fact is, that's all of our business.
Oh, great.
It is absolutely a threat
Somebody's going
to
over there. Come on,
decent
guys.
people in Portland.
You
I wonder
cowards.
if I
What a
move to a
stupid
town
team.
where I can't be safe because
That's a frustrating
the political
game.
wings do
You
not
should count
allow
on
the
other
law to be
people.
enforced against people if they
I
just
also
simply
like
claim
it for the
themselves to be on the far
variability, because
left.
if you get a good
I mean,
team, it's
that
fun.
can't be, but maybe
But
that's
if you
maybe
get
that's
a
the reason.
garbage team that are cowards, it's just
If I can add one more thing,
frustrating.
I do think responsibility
Really?
for this
Come on,
falls
guys.
to Mayor Wheeler. I think that's the reason that the police don't act. It's not that the police are confused about what needs to happen. And I would invite Mayor Wheeler to come here. I would be happy to talk to him about
We're
what
just
happened
going to let
in
him
that case.
come,
I would give him
huh?
a fair shake.
Not
although I
even
think
going to
he
worry
has a lot
about
to
it? What
answer
are you
for. But
doing?
I think
What are
the
you
biggest
doing over
question
here, you
is
coward?
we've now
What are you
seen
doing
the
over
result
here?
of the mayor's policy,
Doing by the
and that result is
flag.
unacceptable.
You're
And
going to sit by the
is it going to
flag
take
the whole
a
game?
death? Is that what it's going to take in order
Cowards.
for something to be done? Or can the mayor read the obvious implication of this attack, which is the law has to be enforced against all
If they
parties,
really
irrespective
piss
of
me
their
off, I just drive
political
around.
beliefs and claims. And that's just simply the nature of a civilized society.
I want
Especially
to
if it's
point
a
out for the
fast
record
tank
that
coming.
2 neighboring counties to Portland have made a decision that they're no longer going to assist the Portland Police Bureau by sending their
Oh,
officers.
they finally made it up over
They
there to
mentioned the
the mouth
danger
of that
their own
canyon I was
officers
trying
can
to
be
go
put in, as
defend.
well as the anti-police
Losers.
climate.
Loser
city.
cowards.
This was made so clear to me
They weren't even
back in
headed
February
over
when I
there.
attended
They thought a scout was
policing
going to
town
hold
hall, where the mayor was on at the table with the
it. I don't care. I'm over it.
police chief, Chief Danielle Outlaw. There was a ton of Antifa and far left activists who just swarmed this meeting, and they used their numbers to bully. And it reminded me, some ways, of those scenes we saw
he's a
in
me.
Evergreen, of the crowd screaming, and that anger in what should be an orderly meeting, and they were calling for the police to be dismantled and
Dismantled?
telling the mayor that he was too much in support of the police against so-called victimized communities.
Ooh, okay.
So this is the message that he's hearing from the most vocal and angry people, who unfortunately are very good at organizing, particularly because they have no problems with using misinformation and disinformation. And with Portland being the monoculture that it is, there's really no counterpoise providing a different, not just even a different perspective, like citing the facts around certain issues in the city, around policing, for example. It's all about narratives, and I wonder sometimes if these people have taken on their identity as anarchists or communists and put themselves in Antifa. It seems like they've lost meaning and purpose in their life, and so they're looking for it through these extremist ideologies. And when it comes to religious extremism, fortunately, that's very easy to recognize. When it comes to far right extremism,
Should we go
the
down?
public is
Come
very
on,
good
T.
at, and I would argue
Let's do
perhaps
this.
overly sensitive at defining what that is. When it comes to the far left, there seems to be
Fuck.
no agreed
Come
on
on.
definition, and even when you pass the left, what
Gotcha.
does it look like for the left to go too
Oh,
far?
damn. 64
They
got
struggle to
me.
find to give an answer.
Oh, he was Dickermax.
Yeah,
He's going
and
to take care of his anyway.
it's an obvious loophole. If
Well,
you just simply
They just toasted
self-define
3 of
as,
us right there. That might not be
acting
very
on
good.
behalf of
SU-100
marginalized
is sure
people, apparently
vulnerable
you're
right
entitled
there.
to attack
All right,
journalists in the
done with
street.
that.
And
Well,
that
I
can't
told
be.
you
It's just-
motherfuckers that the
there
colleges
can't
were
be a
falling apart
self-defined option to
fucking
violate the law
15,
to dress
18 years ago.
in such a way that you anonymize yourself.
I
And
wouldn't
it's
even
obviously
work
again,
there.
from the
18
point
years
of view
ago, I wouldn't even
of
consider
most
it.
of the Antifa.
And Brett Weinstein
So,
didn't leave
let me
till a
ask you
few
this.
years back.
You're a journalist.
So he stayed 15
You
years
work with
past when I
Twitter.
thought it was out of
And
control.
I'm
So I'm a
wondering
little upset with
how
you, Brett
one does
Weinstein.
journalism in an environment that is this polarized.
In other
and
words, I
toxic,
told
and
you
in which,
guys it was coming.
one
And now
side
you
is
say,
entitled,
oh, people are
apparently, to
getting
commit
beat up.
violence.
People are getting punched in the face.
To call an
I
uphill battle
told you
is an
people were going to get
understatement.
beat up and
Unless
punched in the face if you went down
being
this
one of the
road of
few
the skin, the color of
publications
our
of this
skin is
reach
important.
that is pushing back against this has come under relentless attacks from very established journalists accusing the magazine of being reactionary, alt-right, far-right, all these things to delegitimize it. And it's catching on a little bit in some of the reporting.
Well, how do you like the government-controlled universities now?
Again, lies to delegitimize
Just
your
put the
opponents,
government
and
in control of it. Everything
it's
will be
about-
fine.
And I think this is an expression either you or somebody else said, but I didn't come up with it, but it's about creating phantom enemies.
It's also about preventing you from seeing with your own eyes, right? There's something about, if you hear that Quillette is fringe, far right, whatever it may be, before you ever read a Quillette article, then A, you probably don't go check it out if you don't view yourself as right or center. In other words, what's being broadcast is kind of a stigma that prevents people from looking any farther. It sounds sophisticated. Oh, well, of course they would say that. That's Quillette, and they're known to be reactionary. Well, I wouldn't know how to categorize Quillette politically. I see stuff all across the map, and in fact, that's what you want, is a publication where you can't quite peg where they are because they're not ideological. They're actually exploring things. And, I see stuff in Quillette that causes me to roll my eyes for sure, but I can't name the publication where that isn't the case. And I think the most important point is the strategy that is being deployed prevents readers from engaging content they need to see, and it prevents reporters from actually getting to the story because they can see a threat that is all too real on your face, Andy. Now, I mean, that's what this is. This is a threat to all who would expose what's taking place, and that threat is strategically powerful.
Holy.
Some people have asked me, how Antifa hates you, why didn't you come more prepared and all that? I kept telling myself, like, I'm living and working in a major American city. I'm not in Afghanistan or Iraq. I'm not in a war zone. Why do I need to come with, a phalanx of security with helmets, any of that? No, I look and I say, well, unfortunately, there are days in Portland where it is like a literal war zone. Saturday was one of them.
Good job, boys.
And
right.
It's easy to dismiss what happened as unremarkable, as a local journalist with Willamette Week described it. It's easy to have that view until it's true. Then it's not unremarkable.
Yeah, it's not unremarkable at all. It's utterly remarkable. And, I had the same response at the point during the Evergreen riots where I was being literally hunted, and the police told me that they were actually powerless to do anything about it because the president had ordered them to stand down. My thought was, this cannot possibly be happening in the US in what was then 2017. I'm being hunted in my own neighborhood, on my own campus in 2017, and the police can't do anything about it. Like, that's just, it's an out of this world kind of experience. What, did I fall off my timeline? What happened? And, I think
sure it was June.
If there's a saving grace in what happened to you, it's that we all fell off our timelines together. We now.
Well, how was that going on? We had a whole bunch of guys over there in the
we will see the
valley
response, and if the response doesn't make any sense, then at least we will know where we are.
It felt good because 4 of us ran right to Kittown Center, but that's about all that was going on.
When I was in the hospital, I didn't think that this story would get
64 and make a little bit of money.
What's newsy about some guy getting beat up happens all the time, right? But seeing this outpouring of support and the disgust that a lot of people have. I mean, there was a lot of people who took glee, but fortunately, more people took disgust with what happened. I hope that in my small role, if anything, that if I am able to just move the needle a little bit in the national discourses on far less militancy in this country, and the seriousness that the federal authorities, the local authorities, and our institutions for culture, like, pop culture and journalism, need to really see how dangerous this movement is. And we have elections coming up in 2020, and I shudder to think how this city will respond if the elections didn't go the way they wanted. And people, you came here after 2016, but in November here we had rioting that cost $1 million in damage, and it was so surreal being in downtown and seeing masked individuals run around with bats and weapons and breaking cars, destroying properties, and police inciting fires in the streets, and it looked like a war zone then. And unfortunately, these incidents happen with frequency in the city, and I don't know what more needs to happen for something to change, because as of now, things remain the same in how policing works.
Well, I think people who have never seen civilization break down do not understand what it is that creates safety and security. And so they don't realize how close we hover to chaos.
Oh,
And
it's a lot of guys
what
going
you're
beach,
describing
unless
is
they don't
basically
all go
the
down.
result of a slight change in the
Come on
rules. And
down.
the mayor starts
Oh, not too
winking
many, huh?
at
All right.
Antifa and letting them
4 or
know
5
through
is
his
a good
actions
number.
that they're going to get away with most of
What
what
do we
they
got,
do.
3?
Then they begin to think about what they might do. And that, unfortunately, is always the possibility. You know, it is the role that the law and its
3's
enforcement
gonna be
plays in
rough
keeping
if the K1.
society
Oh God, 3's
viable
not be
is
enough.
greater than we like to think. But it's clearly true, and we are beginning to watch it break down for obviously political reasons. And I hope that your sacrifice causes people to rethink this. You know, what we don't know, the echo chamber problem is very serious. What we don't know
Mess.
is how many people looked at what happened to you, people who naturally would not have ended up looking
Probably
at your
can't
content and thought,
scratch
wait a
it.
minute, what do I not understand about what's going on? Maybe, you know, this attack does not, what's being said about it doesn't make any sense. So how many people woke up is the question as a result of seeing you attacked in the streets of Portland? Do we have any idea? Do you have a sense from what you're seeing
Holy
online
moly.
about people having come to their senses as a result of this?
I was extremely appreciative that a 2020
Get
Democratic
him!
presidential candidate, Andrew Yang, publicly
Kill him!
expressed condemnation of what happened to me.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
That wasn't just kind. It
Oh,
was
and we got
actually
the Panther back there
brave,
too.
considering the parties that
Okay,
that
so
he's
now they've
running
got an M4 on the beach, taking
many
hits,
who
and 4
on
guys
his
with
side
an
who-
OI coming.
believe all the lies about me.
This is going to be a
I
successful
agree.
beach
It shouldn't
run.
be courageous.
And look what's
But
going. Look
I
at
agree with
over
you
here.
that
Look
it
at
is.
that. If these guys, come on.
I
Hey.
want to ask you a couple more questions.
All right, I'm
I
out of here.
fear bringing up the issue of the GoFundMe that was set up for you afterwards, because I know that one of the accusations that will come at you,
We'll
and it's
probably
already
win
coming
that.
at
A
you,
good
is that
beach run's the secret
you
to
did
that
this
map.
for
But
the
some
money,
people
right?
hate the
And
beach
I've
run for
been
some
on the wrong
reason.
end
I
of
don't
that
know why.
accusation, so I know how awful it feels when people say that. However, I do want to point
Type
something
58
out
is
about
such a
it.
damn good tank.
The
The
purpose
gun, I like
of
the gun. I don't know
attacking
why.
you was to make
We'll
you
take a few
and
shots
other
with it and see
journalists
how we like
too
the gun.
insecure to report the story. The purpose of people deciding to fund you without you asking them to do it. I mean, it was set up by Michelle Malkin, is that right? She set up a fund, and you know, within a day there was $100,000 in it. Is that right?
Something like that. Completely surreal.
It's completely surreal. On the other hand, I think this is actually, it's too bad that it comes in the form of money. It really has to, given the way modern society works. But what this really is a desire to counteract the attempt to make you very insecure. It is an attempt to make you secure for the risk that you took and the price that you paid. And I think it's very heartening that so many people saw, hey, there is something I can do, right? They've attacked Andy Ngo. There's something I can do to counteract it. And, you know, the thing about money is at least it lets you quantify the degree to which that's a sentiment, that everybody who donated has skin in the game, and they've said, actually, you know what, you did us a service, and I see it. And so I have to say I'm thrilled to see the magnitude of the outpouring, and you know, it doesn't compensate you for a head injury. You know, head injuries have serious consequences, and that's before we even get to the psychological impact of having been attacked and having to correct your model of the world for that possibility. But anyway, I think it's a very, very positive thing. How did it make you feel when you discovered how much people had donated to your cause?
It was hard to believe, because it wasn't that long ago that I was just this aspiring
We
student
got that
journalist
worked out. It worked out.
writing
Chaos
basically into the
sometimes
ether.
works.
You know, it would go into print in the student paper, but who read that? Tweeting, you know, to nobody reading my tweets. And that wasn't that long ago, and not to look now. Like, there's so many people out there supporting me. I'm a very self-critical person, unfortunately, and sometimes I get myopically focused on those bad faith criticisms of me that are becoming louder and louder as I've become more prominent. And I forget that there's people who find value in the work that I do. And it's hard to believe it even when I see it in front of me.
Gotta move up
can
further,
quantify,
guys.
right?
Can't stop back there.
Money raised. These are issues I
Why
need
are
to
they
work on
stopping back
with
there?
myself. Living in Portland, I am quite persona non grata here. So I don't usually day to day, I don't see real life support. It comes primarily online through messages from people I don't know. So it's harder to visualize that support as something real because of that. But the world is much bigger than Portland.
The world is much bigger than Portland, and I think what you're getting at, there is a vast group of people in the world who do not know what to do about this current situation, and they're troubled by it, and they're frightened by it. And when they see somebody do what you did, when they see what I did at Evergreen, just standing up and saying no, there's this chorus that comes at you that just says, keep going. I don't know how to do this in my context, but you do. Keep going. And it does. I know I shouldn't ask the next question, right? It's too soon, but I have to ask. Do you know what you will do the next time there's a protest announced?
Here goes low.
I think I've heard discussions of some things being in the early stages of planning.
Oh, they got it. All right, boys, let's push around. I'll go. Well, there's an IS-3 around there. That's going to be.
Get out to first succeed and
that's going to be
rough. Your account you. And I wanted to say right away, no, of course not. But with the injury that I'm dealing with and the changes that I have to make in the immediate future, how I'm living my life, I'm not able to go in and do the same things as I did do before. And that fear of a mass mobbing happening again may affect my confidence in wanting to go in. Of course, I work now with the fundraising and all that. There, I have the resources.
All right, boys, come on down.
Professional security and all that. But even with professional security,
yes, sir.
There's 30 people coming.
I was hoping I'd do a little more damage to that IS-3, but
this conversation has been focused on me. There were
brutal.
other people injured. I didn't witness any of that.
Yeah.
I think I was the first person who was attacked. The crowd.
Once they kill that T-26, they're all going to flood down.
Square, and that's where
they're going to kill him, and they're going to come all right on down. Come on, guys, get him.
People that were attacked.
Brave boys, come on. Brave. Oh, look, there's some trouble over there.
Media brick and assault. These
so fast.
In Pioneer Courthouse Square, that's like the heart of downtown Portland, right? It's next to a courthouse, and it's like you see this anarchy, and it's this next thing that I'm going to say is inflammatory. I'm going to say it anyways. Portland prides itself on being a sanctuary
Sometimes
city.
It takes somebody to run out in front and sort of disrupt everything and get it
violence.
moving. But
the mayor in the past
when you see a moment when you do
expressed
that, you got to dive out
gratitude to the police for their
Let's make a little money and get with them. See, that was a fun gun.
Inciting the mob, and he said this after the elderly driver was attacked, pretty close to where I was attacked actually last October in that viral footage. I'm sure you've seen.
I sure did. I retweeted that.
That was a Black Lives Matter type group that was allied with Antifa, chased down this elderly driver and attacked him, and police went there, didn't do anything, and the mayor said that was good. And so my only comment to the mayor is, you think that police intervening is an incitement. It's not. What incites the crowd and what empowers them actually is inaction from police.
Yeah, I mean, this is incredibly simple.
Yeah.
The fact is, society is based on an agreement that we don't attack each other in the street, even when we disagree. And that agreement only functions if those who violate it actually pay a price for having attacked someone. So the answer is, you don't get a choice. If you're the mayor, you don't get a choice about whether or not the law gets enforced. It has to be enforced, even if there's a political price to be paid for it. And I would hope Mayor Wheeler would follow your courage. And the point is, he needs to face whatever political problem he has with equal courage. And I don't expect him to do it, but it's a requirement. We're depending on that. We who live in the city of Portland are depending on the law being enforced. We are depending on blind justice, and the fact that you claim you're on the left shouldn't immunize you
Does
from it.
Brett live there?
All right, one last question.
God, that's good news.
It seems to me that
That's the best news I've heard all day.
in
I'm glad he lives there.
a special circle, and that special circle, as I mentioned before, does not require a person to be of one political belief or another in order to be treated humanely and respected.
What was he
and to have
teaching?
discussion. And one thing I
Evolutionary
learned from,
biology, huh?
I would say a lifetime of talking
But he was
across
super careful
political
about it or
differences,
something, wasn't he? He must have been.
is that
No,
it is
that's what got him in
important
trouble.
that you
Wonder
seek
what-
out
I'm going to have
that
to find out more.
which challenges your core beliefs.
How
Even
did
if
he
your core
live in
beliefs
the
are right,
university
it's
so
important to
long?
know what
You know?
the other sounds like.
Like I
And
saw
not
it
in
was
cartoon
rotten
terms,
years, more
in
than a
real
decade
terms.
ago. I
So
said, this is
I think
terrible.
you and I very naturally
And,
have no trouble
he
talking to each
stayed.
other, knowing that those differences exist. We can be curious about what their nature
All
is.
right,
They're not
T30.
not deep.
What are you doing?
We
Are you
agree on
kidding me?
what
You're gonna
just
hide
world
over
would look
there?
like, and we probably don't agree
Are
on
you
how
for
close we
real?
are to it or what might be done to get us further in that
You
direction.
cow.
But my question to you is, how is there any practical advice
You're going to
for
hide
people
over
who may have
here?
thought you a problematic person, to use the parlance, now discovering
I
that
see.
you're a human being navigating a difficult
Well,
situation
that's
with
dangerous.
courage and integrity. What can people do, having discovered
Let's
that there's something
live
surprising
with
on the
the
other side of the
danger.
divide,
Got to
to
find some rocks up
violate
here.
the
It's
boundaries
really
of
easy.
their echo chamber and
There's only
discover
one
what
set.
exists outside of
I'm
them?
not going to try to shoot at that guy until I get there. And
Humanizing
then it's
your
a tiny,
ideological
tiny
beliefs.
rock.
It's very easy,
There we go.
particularly with social media, to dehumanize.
All right,
Yeah.
boys, move forward now. I got him.
You know,
Come
people
on.
accuse Donald Trump of doing that. People accuse the right wing of doing that. But you really see it practiced across the board. And it's easy to do. It's much easier to,
So look at that. Look at those
beyond
boys in the
hating
corner.
somebody's ideas or what they believe in,
Really?
but to also hate them as well. Having that person
What are they
actually
gonna
become
do now?
that physical
3 guys up there.
manifestation of those
This is a
ideas.
really campy team.
And it's easier, of course, to attack and try to break down a person than
T37.
to
He's
break
a
down
joke.
ideas, particularly.
Come on. What are you going to do back there?
With all the,
Oh, that's lost.
you know, I've failed to be able to convince Antifa militants that I'm a decent human being. When I was first mobbed by them in last November, at a protest, when they all surrounded me, most of them didn't know who I was. Only few of them did, but those few then told everybody a story about who I was. And I was trying to look at them, trying to look at them in their eyes and just be like, hey, I'm a normal person, you know, like, and I couldn't even do that because they were wearing sunglasses.
Just look at them in their
And I
eyes
felt like I
and
wasn't
tell
even
them,
talking to
and
another
they'll
person.
understand.
Regardless of what I said, their response was just anger and hatred. And I was hoping that with my continued engagement with the group, through attending their events and documenting things in a completely professional, passive, non-confrontational way, that they would see, okay, we might not like the way he editorializes his work when he's a columnist, or we don't like how he tweets, how he chose to word something, but you know, he's not a threat to us. Unfortunately, it went entirely in the opposite direction of them viewing me as a threat because of those ideas. And apparently an existential threat, one that merits this type of response, not just to me, but I mean, my family is affected when family personal details are released out into the public. And these incidents are still, last I was told, being investigated. And it may be like that forever.
Well, I certainly hope that this incident marks a turning point, that they do find the people who attack you, and that they
M10, this is a garbage tank.
justice to them in the court the way it is supposed to be done. The city of Portland will be much better off if that happens, and it will owe you a great debt for having exposed the danger of this cruel and vile movement. In the spirit of what you just said, though, I want to be clear. It is the movement that is vile. It is the de-individuated mob that is so dangerous. We can't speak about the nature of the individuals in the movement. Some of them are clearly bent on violence. Some of them may be rethinking it, having seen an innocent person injured the way you were. Only time will tell. But it is important to recognize the danger of the movement is different than the individuals that make it up.
less important distinction. And thank you for stating that. I'm reminded when one of my video clips of one of these people confronting me, menacing me, went viral, an individual who knew this person from years back messaged me and gave this person's life backstory. And it was one that was filled with mental health struggles and issues with families. And it's unfortunate that they've chosen to deal with that pain by manifesting it in physical rage. But just through those stories, this person is no longer in contact with this person, but it allowed me to see there was a whole different person behind that mask. Well, behind the partial mask, that enough of the face was exposed, as this person recognized them. A story that I, would never have known and would never be broadcast to the enemy, but...
the one line's doing okay over there, huh?
I don't know what it
not perfect, but it's moving, huh?
For change to occur, but I hope that I can play
a part. Kill that ram.
Well,
Ram's
I must say,
tough. All right, we
to
got
an extent have
here.
chills
What
at
do
the
I
moment.
got?
This matches exactly
this M25
who I've
is
known you to be
obviously
since I've come to know who you are over the last couple of years. And the fact that even now sitting there with very visible injuries
P43, that he's useless.
Ongoing serious health consequences
okay, this whole
from this
team's
attack,
useless.
you're still able to see that there are humans
you
amongst
fucking
the mob,
attack, you bitches.
and that's
sitting here wondering what's
Hopefully
going on.
it
I look
happens on the
around,
other side,
everybody's
too.
just sitting. What are you doing, guys? Come
All
on.
right, well, thank you so much, Andy No, for doing
Look, now
this.
the
I
one
know
line's
you've got to
collapsed.
be absolutely exhausted
You
after what you've been
knuckleheads.
through, and I know you missed one day of sleep. Probably you're running on a serious sleep deficit.
All right, let's run.
I can tell people your Twitter handle is Mr.
Here.
Andy
dear.
No,
Right.
NGO. Is that right?
Yes.
Where else can people look for you?
My Twitter has the most up-to-date information on my works as they are published, and from there, if you find what I do of value and you want to support me, there are links to Subscribestar and Patreon and some other options. So,
and there's also the GoFundMe set up by Michelle Malkin, which you can go to her Twitter and find that. And maybe that about does it. For my part, let me say this has been an honor. I'm very pleased to have had Andy here. And if you like this content, subscribe, hit the notification button, and I would love to have you back some point if you're willing.
Who tried to shoot?
it would be an honor.
All right,
Over
excellent.
there. Holy crap. Can I get him? Come on. There we go. Nice. Good job, boys. Okay. Oh, here's this guy. Oh, I'm dead. I'm dead. Come on. I'm dead.
Very important to recreate. You have no bullshit.
I'm dead.
It's Eric Weinstein.
No, I
not
can't even penetrate.
Weinstein.
Yeah, I think it was originally Weinstein.
Weinstein?
Stein.
Oh, Weinstein.
Yeah.
German.
Can you guys move up or not?
Ja.
You
It was
worthless piece
we
of
came
garbage.
from
What are you doing over
town
there?
between
piece
Odessa
of
and
garbage?
Kiev called Umain, and that's where the family,
Coward, it's a
Weinstein
digital
family came
tank.
from.
We talked about
Coward.
how many people mispronounce
Yeah.
Weinstein instead of Weinstein.
It's epidemic, and yet nobody ever says
All
Albert
right,
Einstein.
so we've changed.
Yes,
we
that's-
changed from Black
yeah.
Horse to
That is a
Joe
weird
Rogan
one.
now.
Einstein is no. Is there a guy named Mike Mike Einstein? No. Einstein. Is there a guy like that?
Do you remember the old what was it, Blazing Saddles with
Sure. Mel Brooks.
yeah, Mel Brooks and Harvey Korman character?
Yeah.
Was Headley Lamar, and everyone would call him Heady Lamar. That was like the running joke in the picture. Do
That's right. I fucking loved Mel Brooks movies.
you remember the Yiddish speaking Indians? That had to be the best.
Oh yeah, that's right. He had some great movies, man. There's fun fucking movies, man. Just silly, fun, outrageous movies.
Yeah, I mean he was transitional, right? I guess it was the Borscht Belt being updated for the modern era.
Yeah, into film. Yeah, but it was also, for the time, much more contemporary, but with that sort of Borscht Belt sort of shticky sort of.
Right, and the writer's room, I guess, from Sid Caesar's Show of Shows, was this legendary factory before Saturday Night Live for all of these kind of crazy talents behind the scenes. I think he came out of that with Carl Reiner.
Oh, that makes sense. How old is Mel Brooks now?
I don't want to ask the question because maybe something will happen.
I know, right? It's one of the, I think I saw recently that he turned 93, and I thought, shit, is he dead? Like Mel Brooks, because they were saying all these great things. Mel Brooks, I'm like, fuck, did we lose Mel Brooks? But it's like one of those things where, it's gonna happen. I mean, he's 93.
I know, but every time it does,
I know.
I mean, I guess Betty White is another one of these people.
Right.
Right. And so we need these very exotic links to our past. And they become more important as time goes on if they're still vital, because we want desperately to be connected to something before our current era, given that I think a lot of us sort of don't believe in anything that happened before Google.
Right. Imagine kids today. Imagine trying to describe to kids today what it was like to grow up without the internet.
Yeah, or not being able to reach people. You have to make extensive plans.
Yeah.
Backup plans. Well, if you're not there at this time.
Yeah, you used to have to yell. Open up your window and yell for your friends. I remember when I first got an answering machine. I thought it was the most amazing thing ever. When I was in high school, my family got an answering machine. I was like, this is incredible. And you would leave like stupid music, like to let everybody know you were cool. Like you have some cool music. Like, hey, it's Joe. Not here right now, but if you leave a message, I'll get back to you. Probably.
And then you got like old people who are, I think someone in my family still has one of these cutesy messages from like the late 80s.
Really?
Yeah, on their voicemail. But then who leaves voicemail? And the thing that marks me as an old person is I actually call people.
But I like that. I've been doing that more lately.
Yeah.
I call a lot of people now. I just feel like it's better. The texting thing, the problem is it's very interesting how we separated ourselves into this
I'm trying to be old
this
fashioned.
electronic communication world where I will during the day be in communication almost constantly with a stream of people. The only thing that stops it is a podcast. Podcast is my rest for 3 hours. I'm not talking to anybody other than you. So all those texts that come through, I'll get the end of the podcast. I'll go and look at my phone. It'll be 40 texts sometimes. Like, this is madness. If I had to make 40 phone calls, it'd be impossible to manage. It'd be calls would constantly be coming in. You'd never really be able to say anything. So we're feeding into this weird loop where we just have these short form things.
Right.
Like, hey, dinner tomorrow? Sure, what time? How about 9? I can do 7. Okay, let's do it. You know what I mean? It's like these weird little bursts of information.
Did you ever see, remember this program, California, and what was it called? Is it Californication?
Yeah, television show with the
David
X-Files.
Duchovny,
Yeah.
right. So there's the scene where he's having some really hot intergenerational sex, and this gal says like LOL, and it kills
She
it.
said it out loud?
She said it, and she says LOL, and he loses total interest. There's no amount of heat in the moment that can compensate for the fact that she's using like verbal emojis.
Well, he needs to fucking get over that. I don't know how hot she is. And it also depends on how you say it. If she's really funny, she's like, LOL, and she's like being silly.
Yeah.
Like I said, like, I learned that from Jim Norton. Jim Norton will always say LOL. Like he'll say something really ridiculous and then say LOL.
Yeah.
But he's just mocking himself.
When you're over 50, it's intrinsically ironic.
Right.
But, in terms of this weird thing about Islands of Time, one of the things that we do is we have Shabbat dinner. And every Friday, no matter how atheist and militant people are against any kind of organized religion, they will leave us alone if we say we're going into Shabbat.
Oh.
And so there's this thing about, like, people will pester me in all sorts of situations, but if I invoke something that is vaguely religious, even Sam Harris probably wouldn't call me during that period of time. So I find that very interesting. Like, could you create a religion that was simply there to make sure that you had some time offline?
Yeah, I know if I text Ben
Pretty
Shapiro,
shallow
I'm not
religion.
getting a text
Come
back on Saturday
Ever.
when it's dark.
Yep.
But when it's dark, he texts you back.
As soon as there are 3 stars in the sky, there's Ben on Twitter. It's like, what did I miss?
That's so weird. It's so weird that people buy. I mean, on one hand, I think it's probably a really good idea to just take a break from all that electronic shit and just connect with humans in a very old school type of way. I think it's probably very good for
Or connect with yourself. I had this experience. I actually lived in Jerusalem for 2 years, and we landed in this Orthodox run hotel. And on Friday night, everything shut down, like the textbook. And I then moved into an ultra Orthodox neighborhood right on the boundary of a place where the secular and the Orthodox met. And what was really fascinating to me is I started telling people, you'd never think that it's great not to be able to find a restaurant or a nightclub, but it's amazing that this is enforced downtime. And about a month in, somebody said, oh, you're in the wrong place. Of course you can go out on Friday night. You just go to the Russian compound and everything's hopping and you can go dancing and drinking and all these things. After I knew that, I went dancing and drinking, and I was much less happy than believing that somehow Israel actually shut down on Friday nights. And so very weirdly, I appreciated the constraint. As soon as I knew you could break the constraint, I was less happy, and I would never actually obey it anymore.
Yeah, I think having a rigid rule, even though it seems like counterintuitive in that like it would provide you some freedom by having restrictions, but it does. It gives you some freedom. Like, okay, like now we don't have to think about all these other things. So now we have the freedom to just be alone. Now we have the freedom to be relaxed. Now we have the freedom to just talk to human beings. I think constraints, and it's like, do you know who Jocko is? Jocko Willink?
Totally.
Everybody knows Jocko. Discipline equals freedom.
Discipline equals
It
freedom.
doesn't seem like that makes sense. Like this motherfucker's up at 4:30 in the morning, throwing heavy weights around, grunting and acting like a savage, running, goes out to the beach, and he earns the sunrise every morning. Goes out and takes photos, takes a photo of his fucking watch at 4:30, hits the gym like a savage, and then takes a photo sometimes of the sunrise, earning the sunrise. And like, but you would think, God, it's like a prison to like force yourself into that. But no, he knows there's freedom in that because he knows he doesn't have to make any decisions. At 4:30, he knows what he's gonna do.
Knows what he's gonna do.
You just go do it. And that way, I mean, you look at the guy, he's a fucking tank. Why is he a tank? Because he's always up at 4:30, fucking throwing weights around. It just doesn't, he never stops. He never takes self-indulgent time to lay in bed and beat off and pick his nose and then fucking check his text messages.
He's probably listening to this right now and thinking, yeah, I do a little bit of that.
I don't think he does.
Really?
No.
Total discipline?
Yeah.
Well, I think I remember reading his inner dialogue about going to a birthday party and breaking down and having a scoop of ice cream or something, or a slice of pie. And it's like, the drama of, there it was. Temptation. I held out for 45 minutes. But eventually, I became weak.
Who is this?
Yeah, I don't fuck with that. I just do it.
Wish I
If
knew
I'm
who
in
they
a
were
party,
talking
eat that
about.
cake. I mean, I just feel like I do it enough. I'm all right.
Well,
I'll be fine.
There's this story about Jackie O, that she got this cancer diagnosis. And apparently her first words upon finding out that she had metastatic cancer was, then what did I do all those sit-ups for? Isn't that an interesting comment?
That's an interesting comment. She thought somebody needs to talk to her. JFK was keeping her in the dark.
Is that right?
Yeah, it must be. What's happening over there, Jim? Something on TV. Yeah, like telling her that sit-ups. You want no cancer? Sit-ups. That's the way to do it.
I guess. I don't know. I mean, I think we all
got me. Oh.
we have so many days of our lives that we build this pattern that this is going to go on forever. And there's some first moment, I think I recall it, where the phrase popped into my head, I can see my death from here.
Mm.
And it has to do, there's like this weird thing when you hit 40, you start to be able to have analytic thoughts that are uninterrupted by sex.
Really?
Yeah. I don't know. When I turned 40, I found that some aspect of thinking too much about sexuality definitely decreased.
Benjamin
And then
Franklin
you start
said
to
the
realize,
same
like,
thing.
when your testosterone starts to go down, you don't feel like yourself.
Yeah, you become a different thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, when your chemical composition changes, the way your body feels changes, the way you interface with the world changes.
Like I wasn't feeling all that great yesterday. I was sort of clowning around with the person behind the bar at Starbucks, and she said, "Oh, why are you down?" I said, "I don't know. Just tell me something nice about my hair." And she looks at me and she says, "Oh, I love salt and pepper." I thought,
Damn.
"Oh, really?
Worst.
Is that
You
what?"
barely salt and pepper. I could barely see any
Yeah,
salt.
she's talking about the salt.
She's bullshitting you.
No, she just didn't want me flirting with her, so she just shut me down by saying,
Or
"You want me to
saying
talk
you're
about your hair? Okay, you
Oh.
crossed the threshold. Here it comes."
Yeah. Say,
Which is that's all right.
yeah, as soon as someone says say something nice, like that could get ugly for a girl.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she was in a captive situation. Wasn't being fair.
Oh yeah, right. That is the worst. When
But
someone's
we were
stuck behind a
but
bar.
we'd established a rapport before that. I actually think she thought it was a kind and sensitive comment.
Mm.
But
But I
do-
don't see any salt. I'm looking.
now I'm just fishing, John. There's
But I don't see, there might be a few in
You
there,
know,
but not like
somebody's going to screenshot it and they're going to count all the hairs with arrows. This is something I've learned when you come on your show. Your audience is so large and active that they will pinpoint every like timestamp.
Yeah, there's a lot of people in cubicles right now wasting their employer's time.
To those people, we
We
salute you.
salute you. Cheers.
Why are you folks watching
I should say for the
this?
folks at home that before we started this, you asked me, did I want Laird Hamilton coffee? And I said, Laird Hamilton coffee? What's Laird Hamilton coffee? And you gave me
Superfood.
something laced with turmeric,
Yeah.
which may turn our lips funny colors. So
Nah, it doesn't. No, I drink it every day.
All right.
It's fun.
Yeah.
It's really good though, but it does give you a little phlegm, a little.
All right, after this, I
a little
think
bit
I'm
of
going
that.
to do some more manual.
Because it's got all sorts of MCT oil and all
That
sorts
was
of great
fun,
stuff in there.
actually.
Larry Hamilton's
That was
real freak.
actually a lot of fun.
Really interesting guy.
what a pioneer.
Yeah, just talking to him and hanging out with him and seeing how his brain works. Like,
You got to do that.
Have
Yeah,
you
I'm
watched
on the
my
podcast,
Critique
yeah.
of Pure
it
Reason
was
yet?
really, really fun.
So did
Mr.
you,
Cropper
what is he?
explains
Okay,
Critique
this is
of
something
Pure
I'm totally
Reason.
curious about. I don't surf.
It's good
But
stuff.
because surfing is, in my estimation, going through some kind of a
Better than
renaissance right now.
surfing.
I'm super keen to understand what the series of innovations are,
You go
given
to
that
surfing.
lots of other things aren't innovating at anything like the surfing innovation rate.
Well, the big one is that new type of surfboard. What the hell is that called? Like a
The
sail?
foil?
Foil. Yeah, foil. That thing is amazing, and it doesn't. It's so weird looking. If you look at it, you're like, what are you standing on? Like, why is it elevated? What is
It's a
that?
magic carpet of the sea. Let's be honest. That's what it is. And I'm obsessed. I was asking you before.
Yeah.
There's this guy, Kai Lenny, who for me is just redefining surfing by taking these monster waves and he's turning them into his private little skate park and doing tricks off the top of skyscraper waves. And I'm just thinking, do you even know what you're doing or where you are? He keeps saying this one phrase, which is, I'm just scratching. What blows my mind is I'm just scratching the surface. He knows that he's making that discontinuous jump. And if you think about sport from the perspective of when did things just change like almost overnight, you know, Bob Beamon arguably is one of the great moments in all of sporting history. And it happens in the long jump, just because you have an incremental sport that suddenly, you know, somebody jumps a foot more than anyone's ever jumped before, something like that. So it's really interesting when somebody changes the game.
No,
It is. And when you find out that there's stuff that you can do in other sports, like skate sports, like different crazy flips and stuff, and someone figures out how to do that on a wave,
Come on up.
the consequences are so fucking grave. If you make a mistake and you're on an 80-foot wave, and that bitch comes slamming down on you.
The part of the innovation is safety, right? Like with these vests,
inflatable vests,
and with these water safety courses for big wave surfers.
Holy crap! Can I
I think that
scratch
what's
you or what?
fascinating is
Jesus.
you think the innovation is in the tricks, maybe, but maybe the innovation is actually in, hey, you can afford a 2-wave hold down in a way you couldn't before, or you're going to survive all sorts of things that might have been fatal.
Right. So you have this open area to innovate.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining
I
me.
mean, surfing's fascinating to me. I don't do it. I haven't done it, but
Surfing
I went
is not fascinating, so I've got to stop. Joe Rogan, I can only take so much of. And I'm going to stop the broadcast now. Thank you for joining me for this, whatever we've been doing.